I briefly want to mention that, from a perspective of someone that hires people with bioinformatics backgrounds, I think it's important to understand as a student, potentially you might not really know what that work might look like, what the projects and what the different challenges might be. And from the employer's perspective, and the employer here could be either in a company or in a lab, a research lab, a PI of a research lab, they don't really know how to evaluate someone who's coming to them and trying to show their resume or trying to, come as someone who knows, let's say, bioinformatics or even biotechnology for that matter. So in a lot of cases, when you're faced with that critical interaction, what are some of the things that you actually want to be able to demonstrate? One of the things that will always come up is the soft skills, so to say, right? So how well can you present yourself? How well can you answer questions or maybe think on the spot about some question that involves maybe a non-direct answer, right? Where you have to show your ability to think, consider the different options, come up with maybe some kind of a decision that needs to be made. And because these kinds of interactions can never fulfill the role of getting to know someone, right? The interactions are very brief and non-conclusive. That's why your resume is not enough. That's why just coming to the interview is not enough. In a lot of cases, what happens in the graduate, lab, where people, from PhD level and onwards are hired, is that people look at the quality of your research. So that might include participation in research, in papers, maybe recommendations from people who have worked with you before. But for an undergraduate, it's very difficult to get to that level. You probably have limited participation in research. You probably don't have a lot of references to share about your ability to work in a research environment. You probably had minimal opportunities to conduct research from beginning to the end and even know about all of the different stages that go into that kind of research. And a huge challenge for that is access to high quality lab environments. So as an undergraduate student, you have to go through a lot of training and potentially be in a well-funded institution to have access to a lot of that kind of equipment. And that's why bioinformatics is such a critical opportunity for those who want to develop those kinds of skills and who want to stand out in terms of their capabilities when they apply for research positions, when they apply for positions in the industry, or even when they want to continue their research and study in a university. So I want to briefly speak about the research fellowship program that we have that brings the opportunity to work with big data coming from expert labs, interact with mentors from around the world that have the background and the kind of track record and could potentially give you a recommendation letter at the end. And also the training that we provide, which will really highlight the different opportunities in both research and in industry on how bioinformatics is actually used. Okay, thank you. So those are the three main components of this program, right? And so I'll briefly kind of show how these three different components are used in several different directions that I think are very promising in the world of bioinformatics, where really you can see a lot of data coming to the forefront of biological discovery and translational research that leads into biotechnology, pharmaceutical industry, and the clinical research field. So there are kind of four of these topics that I will briefly talk about: precision medicine, population health, biotechnology and agriculture, and space and astrobiology. These four have been chosen because the amount of data, the complexity of data, and the reliance on computational biology skills, individuals, infrastructure, etc., is growing at an exponential rate. So let's first talk about precision medicine. What we all know is when we think about the word medicine is that at the beginning of that journey in medicine, you meet a doctor or a nurse. And as you probably all know, when you go to a doctor, you go to a clinic, the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to try to diagnose the disease. And diagnosing the disease is a process that involves expertise, so a lot of experience that doctors have dealing with this specific type of disease. It requires labs where your samples are being sent to identify what's going on. What exactly is this? And then it also has this large field of research that constantly is being updated because people are finding new meaningful insights about different types of diseases and conditions that we call preclinical conditions that lead to diseases. So in this field of precision medicine, this whole change from having a few indicators that can tell us very accurately what the disease is, that is changing to many, many more indicators that are much more precise. That's where the word precision comes from in the term precision medicine. But also because they are so precise, they are specific to very small groups or even individuals. And that's where the word personalized medicine comes from. So those two parallel directions of precision and personalized medicine converge in specific chronic diseases. And those could be cancer, metabolic diseases, and others. And they include a combination of various markers that can help us understand the risk, how predisposed someone is to have a disease happen early on, complexity of disease progression. So how likely are they to recover fast or develop some complications? But also importantly, to two very specific and immediate needs in this field, which is accurate diagnosis and then effective treatment selection, because it's important to select treatment that actually is going to be effective. So in the world of precision medicine, bioinformatics and biomedical analytics play a huge role because so much data at every interaction is being collected that someone needs to make sense of that data. And that someone today are very specialized genetic counselors and maybe clinicians, doctors, But ultimately, this field continues to develop. And in between those interactions, there's going to be a lot of opportunity to, number one, conduct research that leads to identification of these markers, and also to technicians that will have to deal with this kind of data, process this data, analyze this data, and be able to say something about this data. So I think this field has a huge potential for those of you that are interested in medical school, that are interested in MD, PhD programs, but also that are interested in research that has the potential to change the way that people are diagnosed and treated for precision medicine. The second area that is very obviously right now being changed in front of our eyes is the world of public health or population health, where we see this pandemic and others really change our reliance on molecular diagnostics to identify specific strains, to identify populations at more risk, to understand new approaches to vaccine design, right? We're seeing it in front of our eyes. And so I think it's obvious that in this field, there's going to be a tremendous change as we move forward in terms of how much data and how much analysis of that data is being done to really be able to anticipate, react more fast to these kinds of outbreaks, but also to be able to design new therapeutics and interventions like vaccines to slow the transmission of diseases. Another important area is the field of biotechnology and agriculture. We kind of combine them together, but really I want to first talk about agriculture. So as you know, with climate change, there's a huge concern about the ability of crops to remain resilient. With the recent increase in the prices of fertilizers, we see a lot of people turning to bacterial type fertilizers that change the microbiome of the soil. But because land is so different right? There's different types of toxicity, acidity, amount of water being available in different fields. Now we understand that we can effectively measure those different kinds of indicators and identify the best crops for the best portion of land. We can increase productivity of those crops, and we can make those crops more nutritious, more resilient, and easier to grow. And so the field of precision agriculture is really emerging as a field that will be dominated by data, but importantly also by omics data. You can see the number of crops that their genomes have been sequenced to be able to ask these questions is growing every year. And you can see that the ability to design new crops and make specific features of those crops become more attuned to the needs of a specific region. Those kinds of studies are emerging. You can see a huge issue with forests around the world where they are being attacked by insects and they're being subjected to harsh climate conditions. And obviously all of that ties into the quality of the environment that we live in. Finally, I want to briefly mention space and astrobiology. So when we think about space, we don't typically think about medical needs. We don't think about quality of life, right? I mean, astronauts go there and they train for years to be even considered. But eventually when they're there, they have to deal with these very harsh conditions. And those include conditions of microgravity, conditions of radiation, really limited food supply and diversity of food. So there's really a very unique combination of factors that we know affect human health in a profound way. And that's why there's a huge effort in not only building technology to get us to space, but also developing methodologies to understand how space travel will affect health and how we can adapt to these conditions to be able to grow food, maybe on the space station. As you probably have seen, the first Arabidopsis plant has recently been grown in moon soil here on Earth, but it was in moon soil, and that is a significant study that shows that it is possible to grow food on the moon, theoretically. But also there have been studies about the microbiome because there's an issue with different types of microbes living in the space station, International Space Station, right? So there's a huge interest and funding available for those kinds of studies. And in fact, many of our interns and fellows have been able to conduct research studies using data that NASA is actually providing free of charge to the community at large, encouraging students, researchers to be asking questions about what's happening in space and how can we understand and better prepare for the type of space travel that is envisioned by these space agencies. So to start addressing the variety of topics that we just discussed, I think Dr. Raghavendran already provided you with a clear framework on how to be able to address some of those questions. But I want to review again a couple of the slides that he already shared, but maybe focus on them in a little bit of a different fashion. So the first thing that he mentioned was the challenge with selecting a topic. We just saw 4 major domains, a lot of potential directions, and a lot of interesting questions that could be asked. And I think as you get to know every one of these domains and you are able to study the research publications out there that come out or have come out in the recent years, you will find that a lot of those papers, they focus on organizing and categorizing different topics relevant to that domain. So if you take the field of precision medicine or population health or biotechnology and agriculture or space omics, you will find that a lot of those kinds of experiments and studies that have made a significant impact on that field will be categorized. They will say, this is what has been the topic, this is why, these are the types of experiments that have been done to address that topic or question. The second thing is that in the discussion portion of those publications, you will find a lot of times the reviewers and the people, authors who write these papers, they will actually identify gaps, unanswered questions, controversies, and debates around specific topics. And those are really the most interesting topics that you potentially as a student or as a young researcher can start to think about. A lot of those are limited by the amount of data that is available. A lot of those are limited by the types of experiments that are possible to conduct. But this field is developing very rapidly. And so it is easy to imagine how a publication can only focus on a small portion of an unanswered question, and the rest of the data that is available from the experiment has yet to be analyzed in a specific way to be able to contribute to those answers. So I think that bioinformatics and the availability of this public domain data really allows us to leverage these high quality, expensive data sets that are now publicly available to be able to ask very specific, impactful questions that we can actually answer. And I think that this research fellowship program is designed specifically around that kind of need. It is designed to help you identify those, understand the context of where the question is being asked, find those data sets, and then be able to conduct analysis to be able to answer those kinds of questions.